Mom, maybe you shouldn't speak during dinner. It's confusing for people. Claire didn't yell. She never does. But those 12 words, delivered with a smile, in front of guests, were sharper than any slap. The whole table went quiet. Sam froze fork midair. The neighbor couple blinked, and me. I took a sip of water, let it linger, and swallowed my dignity with it. Then I laughed. Not a big laugh, just one of those tired little exhales that say, "Oh, so this is how it's going to be tonight." What Claire didn't know was that I'd been quiet for weeks. Watching, listening, and getting ready. So I folded my napkin, set it beside my untouched plate, and said calmly, "Sweetheart, find yourself a new narrative. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far this little truth bomb travels."
Now, where were we?
Yes.
The moment Sam leaned in and whispered, "Grandma, you have to leave, right now," it wasn't panic in his voice. It was urgency, raw and real, tucked behind teenage restraint. His fingers twitched beneath the table. His gaze didn't flinch. I raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me? Back door?" he mouthed. Claire was still smiling, still performing. "Oh, and of course," she cooed to the neighbor wife. "Mom's memory's been a little foggy lately. We're working on getting her some help." My throat tightened. It hit different hearing it out loud, the rehearsed lie. The casual dig, the script she'd been preparing, testing, perfecting. I stood, slowly, deliberately. Nobody stopped me, they just kept chewing. My coat hung in the hallway. The one with the stitched cuffs Claire said made me look out of touch. I grabbed it, slipped it on, and walked through the laundry room, straight out the back. The air hit me like truth, crisp, unforgiving. Montana in late fall. My truck sat under a dying floodlight, half-shadowed. I didn't rush, didn't shake. I opened the door, slid behind the wheel, and stared through the windshield. Inside that house was the pie I baked, the china I inherited, and the daughter I raised. And here I was, a ghost outside my own bloodline. I didn't cry, but I did tighten my grip on the steering wheel hard enough to feel my pulse in my palm. Sam had warned me. And I believed him, which terrified me more than anything Claire could have said. Why would a 15-year-old tell his grandma to run? Why now? I started the engine. No headlights. No music. Just the sound of gravel as I pulled away from the house I helped pay off, toward the farmhouse I nearly sold to fund Claire's first real estate flip. Funny. Back then, she called me her rock.
Now?
Just a liability in pearls. 2 weeks ago, the credit union called about a withdrawal I didn't make. Claire said it was just a mix-up. Last month, I found documents in my mailbox about a trust. My name was on them, but the signature wasn't mine. I let it slide, because denial is cheaper than confrontation. But tonight cracked the seal. That whisper, that look in Sam's eyes, that smirk on Claire's lips, it wasn't just rudeness. It was preparation, performance, proof. As I drove into the dark stretch of road toward my farmhouse, sister's old place, the one Claire once called creepy country crap, I made a quiet decision. I'd stop being quiet. She wanted the house. She wanted to be the caretaker. Fine. Let her take care of the fallout. The gravel popped beneath my tires as I turned down the old lane toward the farmhouse. No porch light tonight, just moonlight pooling across the long dirt drive, same way it always did in October. Funny how you can see your whole life in reverse on a quiet road. I used to drive this way after long days at school, principal of Lincoln Middle for 17 years. My office smelled like dry paper and cinnamon tea. The kids called me M's, Lennox, even after I retired. Claire was 8 when I got that job. She used to wait in the library for me, legs swinging under the reading table, devouring anything with horses or girls who talked to ghosts. She'd run to the car with ink-stained fingers, backpack too big for her frame. "Mama, guess what I learned today?" I remember those words more clearly than anything she said this past year. Grief's strange like that. It chooses what stays. My husband, Gerald, died when Claire was 11. Heart attack, fast, brutal. He collapsed in the garage holding a box of her old ballet shoes. He was 48. I remember the sirens, the coppery smell of blood on the concrete. How Claire clung to me and didn't speak for 3 days. I thought we were bonded forever after that. I thought losing him had stitched us tighter. Maybe I mistook trauma for glue. The house came later, 5 years after his death. My sister June left it to me in a will so simple. The lawyer raised an eyebrow. "No conditions. None," I said, blinking back tears. She wanted me to have it. It was run down then, sagging porch, rust on the roofline. But the bones were strong. Claire hated it. Why would you want to live in the middle of nowhere? She asked when I brought her to see it. Because it's quiet? I told her. Because I needed somewhere no one pitied me, I repainted every room myself. I planted lavender behind the kitchen window, put up curtains from an old fabric stash June and I used to make dresses with in college. For a while it was home. Real home. Peaceful, private. Claire visited that first Christmas. Sam was still a baby, red-faced and squirmy, always hungry. I watched her bounce him by the fire, laughing like a girl again. I remember thinking, maybe the world was healing. Maybe we were too. But memories have sharp corners. They don't warn you when they turn. The last time Claire laughed with me, really laughed, was over burnt banana bread. She'd dropped by unannounced. Sam was 10. I was experimenting with almond flour and the whole thing caved in like wet sponge. Claire burst out laughing, tears in her eyes. Mom!
You weaponized baking?
We sat on the porch swing and finished it anyway, with too much butter and no apology. That was 8 years ago. After that, the visits changed. She'd come when something was tight. A closing fell through. A buyer backed out. Her voice on the phone always started the same. Mom, you know I hate asking. I didn't mind. At first. That's what mothers do, right? She said she'd pay it back after her next big sale. That was 4 sales ago. I didn't keep track, not on paper, but the numbers carved themselves into my sleep. One night she needed 10 grand for urgent escrow. Another, 15 for a staging loan. I started cooking extra just in case she showed up with Sam. Even when they didn't come, I wrapped the leftovers in foil and labeled them with her name. Claire, Lasagna Wednesday. Some went untouched for weeks. One winter she forgot my birthday. Called the next day, said Sam had a cold. Her voice cracked when I said, "That's all right." Dear. She used to call me Mama. I hadn't heard that in years. Somewhere along the way, our words got thinner, smiles tighter, my questions shorter. Still doing okay? Yeah. Busy, you know. I knew, but I never asked more. Didn't want to sound like one of those clingy mothers Claire always rolled her eyes at. So I nodded, listened, wrote checks, and believed. Because believing hurts less than admitting you've become inconvenient. Now, as I pull into the dirt driveway, the porch looms ahead like a memory refusing to die. The farmhouse looks the same from the outside. Same chipped white trim. Same wind chimes, June's wind chimes, tapping gently in the breeze. I turn off the engine, step out. The night is still. The lavender behind the kitchen window is brittle now, gray and tired. Like me, I unlock the front door, enter the dark hallway, and reach for the switch. The old kitchen light buzzes once before humming alive. Faint gold spills across the floor, soft and familiar. Everything looks fine, but grief taught me a long time ago. Rot doesn't start where you can see it. It starts beneath. I just didn't see the rot growing under the paint. The waiting room smelled like hand sanitizer and coffee gone cold. Claire had said it was just a routine checkup. Mom, it's covered by insurance. Nothing to worry about. She'd chirped on the phone. But when we walked in and a woman with a clipboard greeted us with, "We're just going to do a little cognitive screening today," something twisted in my gut. Claire patted my shoulder. "It's just protocol. Folks over 65 get this all the time. Folks over 65. I'd taught 7th grade algebra with a chalkboard and no calculator. I organized district curriculum before she finished braces. But sure, test my memory. The woman led me into a small room with beige walls and motivational quotes in cheap frames. Sam stayed in the waiting room. His face was pale, eyes locked on his phone.
Not reading, not scrolling, just holding it.
The woman, Maya, she said, asked me to draw a clock. A clock? I raised an eyebrow. Yes! She smiled, pen poised. Draw the hands to show 10 past 11. I stared at the paper, my hand trembled slightly. Not from confusion. From anger, I drew it, carefully. Then came the questions. What's today's date? Who's the president? Can you remember these 5 words after a few minutes? I answered every single one. Claire sat nearby, arms crossed, nodding along like a helpful parent at a school meeting. She's been having little lapses lately, she offered brightly. Forgetting names, repeating stories. Nothing major. My mouth went dry. Claire, I said. When did I forget anything? She blinked, fox innocent. Last week, you asked about Sam's math tutor twice. Because she never told me the first time. I looked at Sam through the glass pane of the door. He looked back. Quick glance. Then away. Maya made notes. Click, click. Her pen tapped the edge of the clipboard like a countdown. Claire smiled again. She's still sharp most days. We're just being proactive. A proactive for what? Mabel Lennox, age 70, former school principal, widow, lavender gardener. Grandmother, now liability? I folded my hands in my lap. They felt colder than they should have. The room was warm, but something in me shivered. I looked at the print above Maya's head. Duh, it's not forgetting. It's just relearning. Who hangs that in a doctor's office? The session ended with a handshake.
She did well?
Maya said, smiling thin. Claire leaned in. See, all fine. I nodded. But something about her tone, her relief wasn't relief. It was disappointment. Back in the car, I opened my notepad. I'd kept one for years. Grocery lists, planting dates, reminders for garbage day. Thursday, return library books. Friday, call Maggie. And every item checked off in blue pen. Not one mistake. I flipped through pages, dates, birthdays, even a pie recipe written from memory last month. Confused, she said. I stared at the word as if it might fade. It didn't. I glanced at the rearview mirror. Claire was still inside, talking to the receptionist, laughing, hand gesturing big, performing. Sam opened the back door quietly. He didn't say anything, just clicked his seatbelt. You all right? I asked. He nodded, eyes on his shoes. Claire said you've been quiet lately. He shrugged. She's busy, he muttered, always talking, though we drove in silence. At a red light, I tested myself again. Sam, what year were you born? 2008? What month? June. What was your first pet's name? He looked up. Booger. He smirked. Don't pretend you forgot. I didn't.
I never forgot.
Not the green collar. Not the way Booger hated the vacuum. Not the day he died. But Claire had convinced someone, maybe even herself, that I was slipping, that I was fading. And once people believe that, it doesn't matter what's true. Later that evening, we stopped by the grocery store. Claire said we needed a few things. She walked ahead, cart rattling. In the cereal aisle, we ran into her neighbor, Dana. Dana's one of those women who wears perfume to pick up bananas. Always smiling, always scanning. Oh, hi, Claire! She cooed! And hi, Mrs. Cood. Lennox? Claire waved her hand dismissively. Mom's a bit out of it today. Long appointment. You know how it is at her age. At her age. I opened my mouth, closed it. Dana tilted her head, all sympathy and superiority. I forget everything these days, too, she whispered. I wanted to scream. I didn't forget a damn thing. But I didn't. I watched Sam's face instead. He didn't smile, didn't speak, just stared at his mother, long, unblinking. Claire pulled me aside near the freezer section. Mom, don't make a scene. I wasn't. Well, just don't. The frozen peas blurred behind her. I clenched the cart handle. My knuckles went white. Claire turned back to Dana. We're just trying to stay ahead of things. You know, before memory really starts to go. That's when I realized something. This wasn't about concern. This was about control. And Sam, he was starting to see it too. He slipped his hand into mine on the way to the parking lot. Didn't say a word. But that one gesture said enough. I sat in the passenger seat as Claire loaded the groceries. My reflection in the side mirror looked the same. But I wasn't sure who she saw anymore. Was I being tested or replaced? Claire showed up with a pie. Store, bought crust too smooth, filling too bright. I thought we'd do something simple today, she said, breezing into the kitchen like she still lived here. I wiped my hands on a dish towel. The sink was full of lavender stems, drying for sachets. Simple sounds nice, I said. She set the pie down and reached into her oversized bag. Actually, I brought some paperwork too. Just house stuff. She pulled out a thin blue folder and tapped it twice on the table. My chest tightened. Claire smiled. Don't worry, it's nothing complicated. Just updating the trust. Insurance wants us to keep everything current, you know, in case anything ever happens. She always did that, pause before happens, like saying death out loud would conjure it. I nodded slowly. She flipped the folder open. See, you're still listed as the grantor. This one just clarifies that I can help manage upkeep. Plumbing, electrical, stuff you don't want to deal with anymore. Her pen clicked. That sound sharp and rehearsed. Bounced off the tile walls. She slid the page toward me. There's a spot here. And here. I didn't reach for it. Claire, I said softly. Why now? This she blinked. What do you mean? This house has been in my name for 20 years. What's changed? She tilted her head. Nothing's changed. I'm just trying to be responsible. Honestly, Mom, it's better to have these things lined up before something goes wrong. I looked down at the paper. Legal words. Passive verbs. Long sentences that made simple things sound benevolent. Claire's hand rested gently on my wrist. I'm not trying to take anything. I'm trying to help. I forced a smile. Let me read it tonight, I said. I'll call you tomorrow, she hesitated, then nodded. Sure, no rush. Just don't let it get buried in junk mail. When she left, I didn't touch the pie. I poured myself tea instead. The mug read, "World's okayest, Mom, a joke Sam got me years ago." I opened the folder again. Every page smelled faintly of her perfume. Floral, slightly powdery. A scent I once loved when she was little. Now it clung like something I couldn't shake. I set the papers aside and walked to the cabinet drawer, the one with all my files, tax returns, insurance policies, old letters from June, and my bank statements. I flipped to last month. One line jumped out. Withdrawal twiddle 500, online transfer, maintenance expense. I hadn't made any transfer. My breath caught. I checked the next line. Station change of mailing address, pending. I reached for the phone, then stopped. Claire said not to worry. That she was just helping. Still, I found a pen. I circled the line, wrote the date in my notebook. I sat back in my chair and stared out the window. The lavender swayed in the breeze, soft and unknowing. But something in me stiffened. I wasn't losing my memory. I was being erased. That night, I couldn't sleep. I turned on the hallway light. The lavender shadows from the window painted the walls pale gray. Something about that $2.500 gnawed at me. I went to my desk, opened the laptop. It was dusty. I hadn't logged in for over a week. The bank's website loaded slow, the blue wheel spinning longer than it should. When it finally opened, I entered my login. Access denied. I blinked. Retype. Denied again. I checked my notebook. Yes. Same password I always used. Sam helped me set it last year. I clicked forgot password and followed the prompts. After answering my security questions, a new message appeared. Sus, account access restricted due to change in account authority. Please contact your branch. Said change in authority. I stared at the words until they blurred. My fingers felt cold on the keyboard. The farmhouse creaked with wind outside. Familiar, but tonight it didn't feel safe. It felt like something was shifting under the floorboards. I reached for the landline, dialed the number on my last printed statement. The automated voice answered first, then a human. This is Angela. How can I help you? Hi, this is Mabel Lennox. I'm trying to check on a transfer that appeared last week. $2,500 for something called a maintenance expense. I don't recognize it. She paused. I could hear clicking. Can I verify some details with you, Ms. Lennox? Of course. I gave her my information. Full name, address, last four of my social security. Another pause.
I'm sorry, ma'am,
She said. It looks like there's a new authorized representative listed on your primary accounts. I'm not allowed to disclose account activity without their permission. I gripped the receiver. Excuse me. There's a power of attorney form filed. Effective 3 weeks ago. Do you know a Claire Maddox? My mouth went dry. She's my daughter. Oh. Well, she's listed as the authorized agent now. Any changes? We'd need her written revocation or legal override from you. I was silent, not angry. Not yet, just hollow. I never signed anything. I whispered. I understand. You might want to visit your local branch. Bring any documents you have. I'm sorry, ma'am. The click. The line went dead. I sat in the quiet, just me and the humming fridge, just me and the sharp, rising realization that something had already slipped too far. Claire had used my trust, my calm, my hesitation. She knew I wouldn't question her, not until it was too late. I walked to the window. The porch light flickered faint. My breath fogged the glass. Somewhere in town, my name had moved across a line, paper to file to system, and I hadn't touched a single pen. But the world was starting to believe it. I signed nothing, but they had my name. I called Maggie first. She didn't pick up. It wasn't like her. We talked every other week since 2011, even through her hip surgery, even through Sam's birth. I left a voicemail. Hey, On could use your ear. Call me when you're up. Her silence rang louder than any answer. I waited an hour, then tried Doris. Hi, Mabel. She answered, a bit too bright. Everything all right? I hope so, I said. Just had a strange situation with the bank. They say Claire filed something I never signed. Oh, well, maybe just a miscommunication. Her tone shifted, like she'd rehearsed that line.
You talked to Claire? A pause?
Briefly, Doris said. Last week. She mentioned you'd been under a bit of stress? I'm not confused, I said quickly. I remember everything. No, of course. She cut in. Still, maybe just take it easy, okay? Sometimes it's good to let the younger ones manage things. The line went soft. She was still there. But she wasn't. I didn't call anyone else that day. Instead, I made tea. The kettle whined too loud in the quiet kitchen. I poured it into my oldest mug, the one with the chip on the rim, Gerald's favorite. I sat by the window and watched the wind rustle the brittle lavender. The silence in the house felt different now. Not peaceful, just vacant. Even the fridge seemed to hum with pity. Claire had been busy calling them, warning them, creating a version of me that couldn't be trusted. She hadn't just moved money, she was moving my narrative, changing how people saw me. One phone call at a time. By dinner time I hadn't eaten. The pie still sat untouched in the fridge. Her pie, too sweet, too smooth. I pushed it aside and reached for the eggs. Then my phone buzzed. A message. From Sam. F Grandma, I think they're hiding something. 7 words. But they landed like a breath of air after drowning. I stared at the screen, rereading it twice, 3 times. Then typed text, can you come by tomorrow? He read it. Typing bubble. Paused. Then thus, who I'll find a way. I set the phone down, and for the first time all day I smiled. He arrived just before 10. Sam didn't knock. He used the side door. Quiet, like we'd planned. I was in the kitchen, peeling apples. He carried a backpack, one strap slipping from his shoulder. History book, he said, lifting it like a shield. Midterms? Of course. I smiled. Come in. Want toast? He shook his head. Can't stay long. We sat at the table. Sunlight striped the wood through the curtains. The house smelled like cinnamon and dish soap. Sam reached into his bag. Then paused. His voice dropped low. It's from Mom's laptop. She left it open. He slid a folded paper across the table. My hand stayed steady as I unfolded it. The printout was faint. Ink almost out. Subject draft for Pio A. Philly Fallons. Claire Maddox Tully Simmons. Log Helena Stata Group. Ta will need her signature by end of month. If she asks questions, I'll frame it as standard maintenance access. She's still sharp some days, but slips are becoming more frequent. Shouldn't be hard to establish diminished capacity after the paperwork is submitted. Let's aim for full trust transfer before holidays. Want it finalized before Sam applies to Ridge. Appreciate your discretion.
I read it twice.
Then once more. The page trembled slightly in my hand. Not my hand, the air, the house. Or maybe it was something inside me? Reverence snapping into resolve. Does she know you printed this? I asked. Sam shook his head. She doesn't know I saw it, I nodded. My voice stayed calm. Smart boy?
He looked down. I'm sorry,
he said. I didn't know how bad it was. You know now. He opened his mouth, then closed it again. I folded the paper, slid it under the apple peeler, then stood. Come, let's find that history book so it's not all lies. We walked into the living room. I pointed at the shelf. Middle row. Red spine. Sam pulled the book down and tucked it under his arm like nothing happened. Like he hadn't just handed me a war map. At the door he hesitated. You okay? He asked. I smiled. Better than yesterday. He stepped outside. I watched him cross the yard, one tall shadow against the late morning sun. The lavender by the porch swayed gently, the same way it had for years. But nothing else felt the same. I walked back to the kitchen, unfolded the paper, ran my finger over Claire's words.
Shouldn't be hard.
No, sweetheart, it won't be hard. Not for me. Not anymore. I slid the paper into a manila envelope and labeled it SKOPY, do not lossy. Then I placed it under my bed and exhaled. I wasn't paranoid. I was being prepared. Claire called it a casual dinner, just a few neighbors. Nothing fancy, she said on the phone. Wear something cozy. Cozy. I arrived in a navy cardigan and low heels, the kind I used to wear for parent-teacher conferences. Comfortable, reliable, unremarkable. The house smelled like rosemary chicken and tension. There were 7 guests, too many for casual. Claire fluttered around the dining room like a TV hostess. Candlelight, printed name cards. She had never printed name cards in her life. Mom, sit here, she said, pulling out a chair at the far end. I sat. Sam was across from me, silent. His fingers tapped the underside of the table. To my left, a tall woman I didn't recognize smiled politely. This is Nora, Claire said. Old friend from Seattle? Visiting for the weekend? Nora nodded. Lovely to meet you, Mrs. Lennox. Her voice was smooth, trained. Her blazer too pressed for Montana. Her eyes didn't smile. I'd seen her type before, back when the district sent behavior evaluators. For kids no one wanted to expel. They never took notes. But they always remembered everything. Dinner began. Claire poured wine into mismatched glasses, something she would have never allowed 10 years ago. So, Mom, she said brightly. How's the gardening? I looked up. Lavender's near dried. Saved the last bunch yesterday? Oh, Claire cocked her head. Didn't you already do that last week? I held her gaze. No, you're thinking of the summer cut? She laughed too quickly. Right. I get confused sometimes too. Nora didn't laugh. She watched me over her wine glass, unmoving. Another guest, a man with a pink shirt and thinning hair, leaned in. Claire says you used to teach. Principal? I corrected gently. 17 years. Impressive, he said, then glanced at Claire. She didn't mention the principal part. Claire tilted her glass. It's hard to keep track. Mom's had so many roles. I smiled. The kind of smile you use to keep from spitting. The rosemary chicken was dry, the mashed potatoes under-seasoned. But no one complained. The real meal wasn't food. It was me. I caught Sam's eye. He didn't blink, didn't smile, just stared. Later, dessert, store-bought pie again. Nora leaned in. Do you manage your medications yourself, Mrs. Lennox? I paused. Excuse me. Oh, she laughed softly. I'm in elder care. Just curious. You seem quite independent. Claire jumped in. She does great. Only a few minor slip-ups. Last week she forgot her stove was on. That didn't happen. Claire knew it. I looked at Nora again. This wasn't dinner. This was a file being built. One polite bite at a time. Claire? I said, can I talk to you in the kitchen? She smiled. Later, Mom. Let's just enjoy the company. And then she added, offhand-o, and Nora's certified in cognitive assessments. Isn't that funny? The table chuckled. My fork froze midair? No, not funny. Planned. I cut the pie even slices, hands steady. Inside I was shaking, not from confusion, from clarity. This wasn't about mental decline. This was a performance, and I'd been cast as the fading matriarch. Claire clinked her glass. To strong women, she smiled. And knowing when to accept help. Lauder Nora sipped her wine. Said nothing, but I saw the small nod she gave Claire. Just once, quick, but real. I wiped my mouth with a cloth napkin and stood. Well, I said, it's been enlightening. A few guests chuckled awkwardly. Mom, Claire said, tone dipped in honey, don't make a scene. I smiled. No scene. Just digestion. I walked toward the hallway. My coat was where I'd left it. I took my time. In the mirror near the door, my reflection stared back. Calm, collected. But those eyes were on fire. I left without saying goodbye. The air outside was colder than I expected. My car door creaked. I drove home in silence. No radio. No headlights for the first mile. Just me and the growing certainty that my daughter had decided to erase me. Quietly with charm. And pie. The next morning, Claire showed up with a smile and a forced laugh. Well, she said, placing a dish towel on my counter. Last night was something. I said nothing. She glanced at me. I mean, you were a bit off. Some of the guests noticed. I poured coffee. Black, no sugar, she continued. Look, Mom, I love you, but it's time to let me take care of things. You embarrassed yourself? I took a slow sip. She waited.
No reaction.
She hated that, I smiled.
Thanks for the pie, I said. You forgot it again. She flushed. Just a flicker, then left no hug. Just the sound of her heels across my floorboards. Sam came by later to grab his charger, he lingered. Help me wash the pie plates. Quiet, hands moving fast. Then, as he dried the last glass, he leaned close. Voice low? Sure I recorded everything. I froze, he continued, her tone. Nora's questions. The part where she called you unstable. My hand trembled slightly as I placed the dish down. He pulled out a flash drive. Hide this. Don't tell her. I nodded. No questions. No tears. Just steel settling into my bones. Sam hugged me.
Take quick.
I'm with you, Grandma.
And just like that, I wasn't alone anymore. I waited until the house was quiet. Then I locked the front door, pulled the curtains, and sat at the old oak desk by the window. The flash drive was small, silver, cold in my palm. I slid it into the side of my laptop. The screen blinked once, then opened. One file, 8 hours dinnered audio, Claire Nora. MP3s. I clicked play. Claire's voice filled the room. She's forgetting things more often now. Last week she asked what year it was, twice? That was a lie. I'd asked about Sam's application year. Once. She still has her good days, Claire continued, but the bank's been tricky. I'm trying to make sure we're covered before it gets worse. Worse. Nora's voice came next. Well, if she's showing confusion in front of others, that helps. Third-party observation holds weight in court. The Claire laughed. She thought the chicken was pork. I blinked. That wasn't confusion. That was a joke. I'd said it because it was dry. Lauder again. Light. Polished. Nothing about it felt human. I paused the file. The house hummed softly. Fridge buzzing. Floor creaking. Clock ticking. I sat still. Then I stood. I opened the filing cabinet in the hallway closet, the one Gerald built for me before his stroke. Second drawer. Labela Galikakil PR Par Y Tirast. I pulled out every folder. Carried them to the kitchen table. Under the yellow lamp, I laid them flat. Claire's folder from last week was still there, untouched. I opened it. Side by side, I placed it next to the original trust June had signed over to me. Same format, but different font. The notary stamp was off-center. The signature line, my name, looked smooth. Too smooth. Printed, I leaned in. In Mabel looped too perfectly. No shake. No indentation from pressure. I flipped it over. No pen bleed. I checked the date. Filed April 14. But my bank statement said account authority changed on April 7, 1 week earlier. Before I even saw this document, my mouth went dry. I flipped another page. This one listed Claire as trustee with full power of transfer and representation. Not co-trustee. Full? I never signed this. I never even saw this. But somehow it was on file with the bank. My fingers tightened around the page until the edges crinkled. I stared at the legal name they'd typed over mine. Mabel Lennox Revocable Trust. Funny word, revocable. Until someone revokes it without you. I gathered the fake pages. Stacked them, marked them with a post-it to verify or else. Stosser, then I lit the stove. Not to burn them, to make tea.
Chamomile?
2 bags, no sugar. I sat at the table while the kettle whistled. And I whispered, just to the empty room, no more waiting. I parked across from the brick building just past Main Street. The law office hadn't changed since Gerald's will was drafted. Same gold-lettered sign on the glass, S. Milner and Tate, estate attorneys. Same squeaky front door. The bell chimed when I stepped in. Ray Milner stood at the reception desk, flipping through mail, 70-ish now.
Grayer? Slower?
But still sharp behind the eyes. He looked up. Mabel Lennox? I smiled faintly. Long time. He motioned me in. Come. I always liked you better than Gerald, anyway. I followed him into the back office. Smell of old paper and stale coffee. Dust in the window light. I placed the folder on his desk. I need you to look at something, I said. He raised an eyebrow, opened the folder, and started flipping through the pages. 5 minutes passed. He didn't speak, just clicked his pen, tapped one corner of the trust form. This signature, he said, is either lifted or scan applied. He looked up. You didn't sign this. I didn't, I said. He pointed to the date on the notary stamp. April 14, but the notarization seal is dated April 11. That's illegal. He flipped to the POA clause. Also, this language isn't standard Montana format. Whoever drafted this didn't expect a lawyer to read it. I breathed out a mix of relief and rage. Ray leaned back in his chair. Who brought these to you? Claire, he nodded slowly. Claire always was ambitious? He muttered. Even as a teenager, she ever pay back that scholarship loan we co-signed for? I didn't answer. He waved his hand. Doesn't matter. He stood, walked to the filing cabinet, pulled out a thick red binder labeled C. Lennox 2008 Tiras Tis. This? He said, placing it beside the fake. Is your real file? He pointed at my original signature. Ink faded, but strong. The pen pressure had pushed slightly through the page. This, he tapped, is legally yours, and still binding. I nodded. You want to press charges? He asked. Not yet. You want to revoke the power of attorney? Soon. Ray studied me for a beat. You don't look afraid? I'm not, I said. He smiled. Good. But you'll need a plan. I'm working on one. I gathered the pages. He opened a drawer, pulled out a clean yellow envelope. For now, he said, keep these copies somewhere safe. And don't let her know you're looking. I won't. I slid the papers into the envelope. Wrote in firm block letters, I see Lugiel su ld dasek. As I stood to leave, Ray placed a hand on my shoulder. You're not alone in this. I nodded, but I already knew that. Sam's flash drive was hidden under my bed. My notebook was filling with dates, times, amounts. And now I had proof. Claire built a lie. I'll build the case. The farmhouse was colder than usual. I didn't turn the lights on. I liked it dark that night. I left the envelope from Ray on the counter. Didn't open it. Didn't need to. The truth sat heavy enough in my chest. I poured tea, chamomile, let it steep too long, then carried it to the living room. I sat in Gerald's old chair. The leather cracked under my weight. The cushion still leaned slightly to the left, just like he did. The moonlight cut across the room in thin lines. It landed on the wedding photo by the bookshelf. He wore a navy suit. I had a crown of wildflowers. I stared at that picture for a long time. Gerald used to say, people show you who they are when they think you have nothing left to offer. I didn't understand that when he said it. Now I do. Claire wasn't stealing just money. She was stealing the version of me that could fight back. The version that mattered. That night I didn't sleep. I lay in bed and let the weight settle. Not grief. I'd mourned already. Not confusion, that was gone. Just a slow, deliberate clarity. At 2:14 a.m., I got up, went to the kitchen, found my old spiral notebook, yellow cover, pages bent. The one I used for garden layouts. I flipped to a clean page, picked up a blue pen. At the top, I wrote as us, reclaim plan step 1 and then paused. The fridge hummed, the wind whistled faint through the vent. I remembered standing in front of a chalkboard, explaining integers to 7th graders. How to keep things balanced. What happens when you remove something from one side without consent? You shift the whole equation. I thought of Sam. Of his hand slipping that flash drive into mine. Of Ray's steady voicey. She didn't expect a lawyer to read it. I thought of Claire. My daughter. A child I held through fevers who now saw me as a barrier, not a mother. Just an obstacle to manage. I picked up the pen again. Get certified copies Ray. Move savings new account. 7-star backup drive lockbox. 3 steps? Small, but mine. I exhaled, not shakily steady. They stole the beginning of my ending, but they won't get to write my ending. I wrote until the pen left a dent in the page. Step 4, secure originals fireproof box. Step 5, request notary log from April 11. Then I stopped. The house was still, the kind of stillness that makes you hear your own breath and believe it. I stared at the page. My handwriting had changed over the years. Rounder, softer. But the pressure was still mine. I flipped back through the notebook. Pages of garden maps, lavender rose, crop rotations, all mine. All from the seasons where I still believed Claire would inherit not just the land, but the roots underneath it. Now she wanted the dirt without the legacy, the control without the cost. I closed the book, then opened it again, and kept going. Step 6, freeze joint accounts. Step 7, request county assessor deed history. I paused. The ink flowed too easily tonight. I remembered a boy from my 3rd year as principal. Theo Martinez, 7th grade. He was accused of stealing an iPad. The teachers were sure, even the other kids whispered, but something in his face, the way he stood frozen at my door. Too still for a guilty child, I made them check the camera footage. Turned out it was another student, one from a good family. No apology was ever given to Theo, but I made sure his file stayed clean. That moment changed me, not because I was right, but because I chose not to rush the verdict. Justice doesn't need noise. It needs clarity, process, and time. I tapped the pen twice on the edge of the table, once for Theo, once for me. Then I picked up the phone. The rotary tone clicked into my ear. I dialed Ray's office. It rang twice. Then voicemail. "This is Mabel Lennox," I said softly. "Let's proceed with the revocation." And the injunction. I hung up. 3 seconds of silence. Then I pushed the notebook aside and walked to the hallway mirror. My reflection stared back. White hair frayed at the edges, eyes tired, but not broken, not gone. Not theirs. I reached for the light switch, flicked it off, and whispered into the dark, "Time to be the principal again." The first thing I did was cancel the utilities. Not mine, hers. Claire had her phone plan under my name. I let it slide when she promised to cover it monthly. She stopped covering it 3 months ago. I walked into the local branch of Pacific Net Wireless, stood at the counter, and said calmly, "Terminate the following number." Immediately, the clerk blinked. "Mom, there's a late fee?" "Add it to my file," I said, then closed the file. His fingers danced across the keyboard. Done, 1 down. Next was the bank. I didn't call. I walked in. Wore my red coat. The one with the frayed cuff and the missing button. The one Claire said made me look like a widow in a nursing home. Good. Let them underestimate me. Inside, I met with a new associate, Amy. Mid-30s kind eyes, no judgment. "I'd like to remove a power of attorney," I said. She checked the account. "Yes? Claire Maddox?" I nodded. Amy leaned forward. "We just need a written revocation." "Signed. I'll notarize it right now if you're ready." I pulled the letter from my purse. Printed on cream paper. My real signature in ink. Knock me, not scan. She read it, stamped it, scanned it again, and smiled. "It's done." I didn't exhale. Not yet. That night, I made myself a casserole, broccoli and cheddar, overbaked, the way Gerald liked it. I sat by the window with a glass of sweet tea and watched the driveway. No one came. Good. I went to the study and opened my old laptop. Created a new folder, F Shelter Notes. Inside, I listed every woman I'd known in town who'd whispered stories about being managed by family. Ones who were moved to smaller rooms. Ones whose bank access vanished overnight. I wasn't building revenge. I was building prevention, but quietly. Quiet enough to not spook Claire yet. The next morning, she called. "I noticed my phone's not working," she said flatly. I replied, "Flipping pancakes. Must be service around here." Silence. Then,
Did you touch my plan? Your plan? I asked. I thought it was mine. She exhaled. Mom, let's not get petty.
"Oh no, dear. I'm just forgetful. Remember?" Another pause. Then she hung up. I smiled. Back at the bank later that week, I asked Amy for a printout. She handed it over. No more Claire on the file. No more shared anything. Just Mabel Lennox. "As it should be," Amy asked. "Anything else I can do for you today?" I looked at her, smiled soft. "Yes," I said. "Help me open a trust. One with only my name." As she nodded, typed. Across the room, the printer whirred, and for the first time in months, I breathed easy. The clerk at City Hall looked 19. She smiled like I was there to ask about bingo night. "I'd like a certified copy of a notary record," I said. "Sure," she chirped, tapping her keyboard. "Date of filing, April 11th. She pulled it up. "Okay, it says a form was notarized under the name Claire Maddox, representing Mabel Lennox. POA declaration?" I leaned forward. "Can I see the actual document?" She frowned slightly. "We only have a summary here. No physical scan. It was marked external filing." "By whom?" She shrugged. "Law firm uploaded it. Notary name says Shelby Grant." I knew that name. I'd seen it stamped across the fake trust papers. But Shelby wasn't a real notary anymore. She'd lost her license in 2019. Quiet scandal, misfiled forms. Maggie told me once. "Over pie and gossip?" I smiled politely. "Can I get a printed record of that entry? Time stamp and name?" The girl blinked. "Sure. Most folks don't ask. But I like paper ladies," she giggled. I nodded. Me too. Back home, I opened my email. There it was. A message from Pacific Bank's legal team. "Per your request. Attached is the digital copy of the signature file submitted April 7. Please note format indicates image overlay. Timestamp confirms remote submission. Image overlay, no ink. No pen. No presence. Just a file. A forgery. I printed it, filed it, next to the notary log, next to the audio from Nora. My folder was growing thick. Teddy. Chronological. Bulletproof. Sam stopped by that afternoon. "Can we pretend I'm here for cookies?" he asked, stepping into the kitchen. "Already baked," I said, nodding toward the tin. He opened it. Snickerdoodles. I placed the stack of papers on the table. "Need a backup set," I said. He pulled out his phone, opened the scanner app. One page at a time, silent. "Focused." He didn't ask questions. When we got to the email screenshot, he paused. "This looks bad." "It is." He looked at me. "You think she knows?" "Not yet." He nodded slowly. "Good." He finished scanning, then helped me seal the copies into a large manila envelope. "Where do you want this?" I pointed to the pantry. Behind the flour, next to the old tin box labeled, "Christmas recipes, perfect." We stood together in the quiet for a moment. Then I placed one final slip inside. The printout of Claire's message. Let's aim for full trust transfer before the holidays." I sealed the envelope. Wrote in black marker is, "To be opened if silence fails." She same looked at me. "Are you scared?" I met his eyes. "No." Then I whispered, "Let's see her explain this in court." The courthouse smelled like old wood and floor polish. I arrived 10 minutes early. Black coat, low heels pinned tight, not to impress, just to be remembered. Claire sat on the other side of the courtroom, pearl earrings, cream blazer. Her lawyer whispered something into her ear. She nodded, smiled. Too bright, a few rows behind her, Nora sat legs crossed, clipboard in hand. They came ready. The clerk called the case. In the matter of Claire Maddox versus Mabel Lennox, petition for legal guardianship. The judge was a woman, sharp eyes, gray roots showing beneath a tight bun. I liked her already. Claire's lawyer stood first. "Your Honor, my client is deeply concerned about her mother's safety. Mrs. Lennox has demonstrated repeated memory lapses, financial confusion, and an inability to manage her daily affairs." He spoke with the rhythm of someone who thought speed equaled truth. I sat still, didn't flinch, didn't blink. He continued. "We have testimonies from 3 witnesses who observed erratic behavior, as well as a cognitive assessment conducted informally during a social dinner." The judge raised a hand. "Informally?" "Yes, Your Honor." A certified elder care specialist was present and made observational notes. My eyes slid to Nora. She didn't look up. Claire shifted in her seat, crossed her legs, smoothed her skirt. Her lawyer resumed. "We're not looking to strip rights, but rather provide structure. Protection. My client has only the best intentions for her mother. Always that word, intentions. Like intentions erase theft, erase forgery, erase betrayal. I folded my hands in my lap. My nails were short, clean. A bit dry. The judge glanced at me. Mrs. Lennox, would you like to respond now, or wait until your counsel arrives? I smiled politely. I'll wait. Your Honor. The Claire's lawyer looked briefly confused. I didn't explain. Didn't need to. He thought I came alone. They all did. That was their first mistake. They thought I came alone. They were wrong. The door creaked open behind me. I didn't turn, but I knew the footsteps. Ray Milner walked down the aisle, slow and sure. Leather briefcase. Gray tie. Calm eyes. Claire's lawyer blinked. Apologies, Your Honor, Ray said as he reached the table. Mabel Lennox now has representation. The judge nodded. Proceed? Ray didn't waste time. Let's begin with this, he said, placing a small speaker on the desk. He clicked play. Claire's voice filled the courtroom. She's still sharp some days, but slips are becoming more frequent. Shouldn't be hard to establish diminished capacity. Gasps from the gallery. The judge leaned forward. Ray continued. This was recorded without her knowledge, during what was presented as a family dinner. The speaker is Ms. Claire Maddox, planning to manipulate an informal assessment to initiate guardianship. Her Claire shifted. Her face flushed. She leaned toward her lawyer, whispering fast. Ray lifted a second file. Here is an email sent from Ms. Maddox to Simmons Law, dated 3 weeks before this petition. It includes the phrase, quote, let's aim for full trust transfer before the holidays. He handed a printed copy to the judge. Claire's lawyer stood. Objection. Unverified source? Ray raised a hand. Already authenticated by Pacific Bank, full email headers and chain available. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. Ray was never dramatic, just deliberate. He pulled out the final folder. And lastly, Your Honor, the notarized POA form filed by Ms. Maddox contains a signature not written by Mrs. Lennox. No pen pressure, no ink absorption. Submitted digitally using an outdated stamp from Shelby Grant, whose notary license expired in 2019. He let that hang. The courtroom was silent. Claire's lawyer looked pale now. Claire sat stiff, lips parted. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said too loudly, This is all taken out of context. Ray turned. Would you like us to play the rest of the dinner recording? The judge held up a hand. That won't be necessary. Not yet, Claire's eyes darted. To the judge. To Ray? To me. Then to Sam. He stood from his seat in the gallery and walked. Not fast, just sure, step by step until he sat beside me. No words, just presence. Claire's jaw tightened. Her fingers curled into fists. But she didn't say another word. The judge turned to Claire. Ms. Maddox, she said. Tone steady. Do you deny writing the email? Claire shifted in her seat. My lawyer? Handled the documents. I didn't personally. The judge raised an eyebrow. But your name's on the file. Claire's lawyer stood. Your Honor, if I may. She waved him down. I want to hear it from her. Claire swallowed. The email was just a draft. Nothing official. I didn't think my mother would. Would what? The silence pressed in. Claire blinked rapidly. I was trying to help. Ray didn't speak. He didn't need to. The evidence already had. The judge nodded slowly, made a note on her pad, then looked at me. Mrs. Lennox, do you feel you're capable of managing your own finances and health decisions? I stood, voice calm. Yes, ma'am. And I have for the past 70 years. She nodded again. Based on the evidence provided, the falsified documentation, the audio recording, and the lack of credible observation, this court finds no merit in the petition for guardianship. Claire's mouth opened. No sound came out. Furthermore, the judge added, I'm recommending this case be forwarded to the County Fraud Division for further review. Her gavel struck once. Firm. Final. Case dismissed. I didn't smile. I didn't look at Claire. Instead, I turned to my right. Sam was already watching me. His eyes were steady. I placed my hand over his. Warm, unshaking, the courtroom emptied around us. Claire gathered her purse with jerky movements. Her heels clacked against the tile. She didn't look back. Outside, the sun had started to melt the edge of the snow. Winter was still here, but fading. I exhaled, not loud, just enough. We walked out together, me and the boy who remembered, and the truth that stood tall beside us. Justice doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just stands. Claire didn't call. Not the day after the verdict. Not the week after. Not once. And I didn't chase. I revoked her access to the family account. Closed the Lennox Holiday Fund. No announcement. No email. Just vanished the login. That was enough. At church the following Sunday, people avoided eye contact with her. Marla kept her greetings short. Mrs. Green didn't offer to share her lemon bars. No cruelty, just silence. The kind that echoes longer than words. I went back to tending my garden. The lavender was brittle now. What was left of it? But I replanted pansies near the porch, red and yellow. Strong roots. The soil felt cold against my fingers. Sharp, real. Inside, the kitchen smelled like clove and vanilla. I baked a small batch of molasses cookies. Half burned the first tray, smiled anyway. The radio played old jazz. I hummed along. Sam still came on Fridays. He never mentioned the court. Never asked what happened next. He just sat at the table, helped slice apples, filled the bird feeder. Sometimes we watched squirrels fight on the fence. Sometimes we didn't speak at all. I liked those silences best. One afternoon, I passed by the mirror near the stairs, caught a glimpse. Same face. More tired, maybe. But lighter, not freer, just unburdened. My name was still mine, my voice mine. That mattered. Not because I'd won, but because I'd kept something intact no one else could rebuild. The mail came late that day, a letter. Return address missing. But I knew the handwriting. Claire, I didn't open it. Not yet. I slid it into the drawer beside the phone, next to Gerald's pink knife. Not everything needs answering right away, especially not when peace finally finds a place to sit, and I'd made it tea. I opened the letter the next morning. The house was quiet. Rain tapped against the windows. The scent of lavender tea drifted from the kitchen. Claire's handwriting was familiar, still sharp, still a little slanted. Dear Mom, it began. Not Mama. Not Mother. Just distance in 2 words. She wrote about stress, responsibility, said she'd been trying to protect the family's future. That things had escalated. She never used the word betrayal, never mentioned the fake trust, or the dinner setup. Instead, she offered softness wrapped in excuses. I didn't mean for it to hurt you. And later, I hope we can return to how things used to be. I folded the letter once, then again, slid it into the drawer beside the kitchen phone. Not in anger, just to keep it from cluttering the table. Some things don't need space anymore. Not in my house. Not in my chest. I made toast, burned the first slice, ate it anyway. Later that afternoon, I walked to the public library. The sidewalk was still wet from the morning rain. I passed a puddle reflecting the sky, split between gray and a crack of sun. Inside, the lobby smelled like old books and carpet cleaner. A flyer on the bulletin board caught my eye. Cooking together seasonal meals for 1 or 2. Tuesdays at 4. Free for 60 low simple. Low pressure. Something mine. I took a tab from the bottom. At the front desk, I filled in my name. The girl smiled. First one to sign up. I smiled back. Somebody's got to be. On the walk home, I stopped by the farmer's market. Bought eggs. A jar of apple butter. A single lemon tart. Treat for one. The vendor asked. Exactly, I said. That evening, I wrapped half the tart for Sam. Saved it in the fridge with a noti Friday. Your half. He still came on Fridays. We didn't talk about Claire. Didn't need to. We talked about birds, the strange shape of clouds, and his newest history assignment. The past didn't hover anymore. It just lived where it belonged, filed, folded, named. The lavender in the windowsill had started to grow again. Tiny green shoots against the glass. I poured tea and sat by the stove, opened the notebook. Page 1 was still there. Reclaim plan step 1. I smiled. I didn't need more steps now, just the ones I chose. Forgiveness doesn't mean re-entry. It just means I don't carry you anymore. The folding chairs were half, filled by the time I arrived. 12 women, some with walkers, some with thick cardigans and thinner voices, all older than 60, all with names someone in their family probably forgot last Thanksgiving. I set my tote bag down on the library podium, smelled faint lemon polish on the wood. The fluorescent light above flickered once, then held steady. I began. My name is Mabel Lennox. A few nodded. One woman in the back tightened her scarf. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a counselor. I'm just someone who almost got erased. Someone near the front swallowed hard. I reached into my bag, pulled out a copy of the fake trust form, held it up. This was filed without my knowing. They tried to transfer my land, my bank, even my ability to choose what tea I drink. A few small gasps. One woman whispered,
Mine did that, my oldest.
I nodded slowly. I didn't come here to scare you. I came here to say it's real, and it's quiet, and it's happening. A pause. Then I smiled, but so is the fight back. I passed out a 1-page sheet. Tight lid. If they try to manage you, start here, 10 steps, clear font, no condescension, just tools. Afterward, one woman approached, skin soft with age, voice even softer. I thought it was just me. I touched her hand. It's never just you? Outside, the sun was slipping behind the grain store. Orange light filtered through the stained glass transom above the library door. Sam waited in the car reading. He waved when he saw me. I waved back. Later that evening, I walked into the side room of the farmhouse. It used to be Gerald's reading nook. Now it held a couch, 2 armchairs, a teapot, and a file cabinet. The hand-painted sign on the door read, "The second say." It wasn't a shelter. Not exactly. Just a place where someone could sit for an hour and say, "I'm still here." I poured tea, set out shortbread, and waited, because someone always comes. And when they do, I tell them we're not fragile. We've just been edited. The knock was soft, barely there. I opened the door to find a woman in a forest green coat, collar buttoned tight even though the air was warm. She looked around 40 years older than her driver's license probably said. "Is this the place from the flyer?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes, come in." She stepped across the threshold like it might bite her, sat down slow. Her purse stayed clutched in her lap. "I don't know why I came," she whispered. "You don't have to," I said. Silence, then her voice dry, unsure. "My daughter-in-law moved me into the guest room last month, said it was more manageable. My bank card started declining 2 weeks later." She blinked. "Hard." I asked my son. He said, "It's for your own good, Mom." That phrase, it never comes kindly. I poured chamomile into 2 chipped mugs, set a plate of butter cookies between us. No advice, no checklist, just presence. She reached for a cookie, then stopped. "Is it okay?" "Of course." We sat for a long time. Rain brushed the windows again. The heater kicked on with a soft hum. She looked around the room. At the bookshelf? At the soft blankets on the chairs. At the sign above the mantel. "The second say," she read aloud. "That's smart." I nodded. No one should have to end on someone else's word. She smiled then. "Tired, but real." "I didn't come to be fixed," she said. "You didn't break," I answered. She sipped her tea. Her hand stopped shaking after the second sip. "I didn't ask her name." "Not yet." Sometimes dignity starts before names. When she left an hour later, she placed one hand gently on the doorframe, like it had steadied her. And maybe it had. I closed the door behind her, turned the kettle off, folded the blanket on the couch, then sat down. One visitor, one afternoon, but enough, because the truth was simple. Dignity doesn't retire. I used to think survival was quiet. That if you didn't cause trouble, if you smiled, forgave, your life would stay yours. But silence doesn't always keep you safe. Sometimes silence is the door they use to walk in and take everything you built. What I've learned, after lawyers, forged papers, and watching my own child try to erase me, is this: you are not too old to be betrayed. But you are never too old to rise. You don't have to scream. You don't have to hate. But you do have to stand. For your name, your story, your final say. And if someone ever tells you that standing up for yourself is being dramatic, sit taller. Pour your tea and say, "No, dear. This is what dignity looks like." Because in the end, it was never about revenge. It was about remembering I'm still here. And I decide what that means.